James, Peter, and the Ebionites. A summary of the timeline of extinction. James, the biblical brother of Jesus, peace be upon him, the first bishop of the first church in Jerusalem. Peter, the rock on which Jesus, peace be upon him, said he would build his church. The Ebionites, those followers of the Jerusalem church, nourished on the oral traditions of those closest to Jesus, peace be upon him. James, the just elected in position by the disciples on account of his maturity, his knowledge, his character as best fitting to be the leader of the church, followed closely by Peter the rock as head minister. The Ebionites lived the testimony of those closest to Jesus. Alongside the oral traditions, they used the original Gospel of Matthew, which was only ever written in Aramaic. We understand that today's Matthew was only written in Greek. We can infer from this that this original Matthew was excommunicated and condemned as heretical, like the believers that used it. The Gospel of Peter, very well known amongst pre-Nicene believers, widely circulated and in the beginning posed no threat to the all-important Pauline doctrine, but we will come to see the concern growing around this in early Christianity. Ebion means poor and ites means people, which of course was used disparagingly by the Nicene Creed Christians. We know that the Gospel of Peter is essentially written oral tradition, and we know that this is common practice amongst the Jews. The Talmud is essentially the Mishnah and Gemara in one book, the Mishnah being oral Torah and the Gemara being a commentary of said oral Torah. So written oral tradition sounds paradoxical, but in fact was very common. And we know that Peter's oral traditions were in wide circulation because we have Eusebius, the Pauline Christian historian whose works is possibly the best insight into early Christianity anywhere. We see that the Ebionites are split into two groups, one on the truth, one on the opposite, both of whom condemned as heretics. Eusebius complains that the Gospel of Peter used by the Ebionites in Jerusalem was, quote, leading the Roses astray, end quote. Roses being in Egypt and the Ebionites followers of the church in Jerusalem. We also see they mention dokatai, meaning appearing human not divine, which again, I think is a misunderstanding, and it's an easy label to start claiming deviation from divinity. The Gospel of Peter has been dated as early as 45 CE, which makes sense when we understand that the earliest memoirs of the apostles, Mark, was authored around 50 CE, and Mark was in fact the interpreter for Peter. It's well known that Peter had an interpreter in Antioch and other places whose name was Mark. Now we also know that in 150 CE, the four Gospels were known as memoirs because Justin Martyr in his book First Apology said as much, and this remained the case until Irenaeus of Lyons wrote the names of the four canonical Gospels in 180 C. Like for a part 2